Welcome to another edition of Behind the Closed Doors. Today we have a very special guest to join us, none other than Bret the Hitman Hart. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
It's been a couple years since we sat down with you last. How's everything going with you?
Everything's good.
Cool.
Life is good.
Good. I guess the very first question we want to talk about today is, pretty much wrestling psychology and the inner workings of the business. I guess for you, you grew up in a wrestling family. Of course, your father was the legendary Stu Hart, and you also had brothers, Owen Hart and all, who were in the business. What was the hardest thing for like a young wrestler to grasp when you were actually growing up?
Hardest thing to grasp. These are tough questions. Well, I think the hardest things for people to grasp are the things that I grasped pretty quick, in the sense that it's not real. None of it's real, in the sense that the whole objective of pro wrestling is really to tell a story and to never ever hurt anybody, sort of thing. And when you start hurting each other or hurting somebody to get your, like chops as an example, they hurt. They completely go against the logic of wrestling. And they look like shit. The guys that chop all the time, and the fans. I think when I hear fans going woo and all that, I think it's so I always learned to take direction from the fans that way, where you let the fans dictate what you're going to do. And I think find people like, anytime you're hurting yourself or hurting your opponent, you're going about everything the wrong way. You got the wrong logic.
Right. I was actually watching your interview you did down in North Carolina, your Q&A, and you were talking about how when the midget wrestlers would come to Calgary and stuff, you'd, as a little kid, get to wrestle with them and stuff like that. Like, at what point did you realize that you were definitely going to get into the business and, you needed to learn it? At what age do you think that was about?
I went through my whole life, I think, from being really small till, easily till I was 12, 13, 14, around 14, 15. I mean, all those years growing up to that age, I always thought that wrestling was something I would probably do. And I always thought I'd be pretty good at it. But when I got to be about 15, it changed, in the sense, I think more on account of who was working for my dad at the time. They weren't very interesting, and business wasn't so good. And they made me kind of lose interest in it, and it wasn't something I saw myself doing. And that shifted, and I went through my whole teens thinking I'd never do wrestling. Like, it was like I had much bigger things on my horizon than that. But when I got to be about 20, you start doing enough construction jobs and things like that, and you're working all day digging a ditch or something, you realize that wrestling might be more fun than doing that. It might pay more, and you might need more girls and that kind of stuff. It just became more appealing to me.
I guess, in your opinion, what was the hardest thing for you to grasp as a wrestler when you first got into the business, like training and stuff like that?
Well, I don't know that I had much trouble grasping it. I understood what it was about, I think, pretty quick. I think most second generation wrestlers get it pretty fast, even if you don't follow it. Like, I'm sure Rock, after a couple of training sessions, just learning the basics and the bumps and all that stuff. Kurt Hennig, all these guys that were second generation wrestlers, they get it pretty fast. You learn pretty quick. You learn, I think the real art to wrestling is to learning how to protect yourself and learning how to protect your opponent.
What was the first thing that you were taught by your father?
I think I was always taught by my dad to try to make wrestling seem as realistic as possible, and to never, not to that you needed to follow up a good professional career always was backed up more solid by a good amateur career. And despite the fact that wrestling's sort of staged violence, or it's all contrived, and the storylines are worked going back for years, there's also a lot of little things that happen in the match that, especially years ago, like when I started, where you had to really know how to handle yourself, and you had to know how to protect yourself. And if you wrestled somebody that was trying to guzzle you or eat you up, you had to know how to stand up for yourself and stop that from happening, because sometimes that could be, all it took was one guy to wipe out. Maybe it would take you 6 months to build up by somebody coming in and mopping the floor with you because they didn't like you. things like that. So those things didn't happen so much, but you had to know when to stand up for yourself in the ring against some guys often that were much bigger than you. And there's a thin line there between how far you go with standing up for yourself. And even that there's a wide range of things that can happen if you go too far.
What were you taught if somebody was taking liberties with you in the ring? What were you told to do?
It was just an instinct. Like you just had to stand up for yourself and protect yourself. And usually, if you could wrestle a guy down pretty strongly, you had to know how to take him down, and you had to know how to establish sometimes a much larger man that, if any more of that stuff went on, you'd have to have an Olympic style match, But I found a lot of big, heavy wrestlers were pretty tough, but they didn't have the conditioning to get into they didn't want to. You could embarrass somebody yourself, if they wanted to get foxy with you, as my dad would say.
Right.
You could embarrass some guy that was much bigger than you by blowing him up or getting him tired. And just being confident enough to know, when you have a good amateur background like that, or a good, say, shooting background, not that I had a shooting background, but I had a good amateur background, I was reasonably capable of defending myself at any given moment.
Was there ever any instances, since you were Stu's son, especially when you traveled outside the territory when you were young, where some of the promoters tried to test you? That didn't happen like that?
Or? Nah, I don't remember. Japan was about the only place I really got tested. I didn't get tested that was the same thing. They tested you on cardio kind of thing. In Japan, they like to cooperate with you right up until they had you pretty much with your tongue hanging down to your feet. And then they start taking liberties with you. And that was sort of an old trick.
Right.
That was the closest I ever came to having somebody sort of take liberties with me in the ring. Most of the time I was always treated pretty respectfully by most guys. And when I was younger, I think anything along those lines where I was being taken advantage of was probably just the process of paying my dues. It was all, in the end, it didn't matter much. Maybe sometimes you think it matters. Even a bad match. You have a bad match, you think it matters. You think everyone's going to remember. 2 weeks later, nobody remembers any of it, that kind of thing. But in your mind, if you're a professional and you're an artist, you take pride in everything you do, and you think, that one stinky match you had is going to be, everyone's going to remember it, and they'll never let you forget it. It doesn't work like that. Same with when you win crowning moments in my dad's territory. I don't think you could find too many fans who will remember today.
One of the most important things about a wrestling match is pretty much to tell a story. And to do that, you have to have wrestling psychology. I guess, in your terms, how would you explain wrestling psychology, and how did you develop yours?
Well, I think the best thing I can say about wrestling psychology is that wrestling psychology follows the same thread that real sports has. If you want to see wrestling psychology, you watch Muhammad Ali's old boxing matches, and you watch Joe Louis or Jack Dempsey. Sometimes you watch these old. Anytime you saw somebody fight back and sort of come back after he's losing the first 3 or 4 rounds, and then comes back, fights back. I know guys like Sugar Ray Robinson and stuff like that. You watch these old classic boxing matches, and wrestling really is just a takeoff on boxing psychology. Or not, I wouldn't say there's psychology to boxing, but the wrestling psychology patterns itself after, not just boxing, but real sports where you tell a story where you're fighting, an uphill battle to get back to where you were and see if you can actually win the fight. And if you watch, like I said, if you watch some old classic matches, like you watch Foreman and Ali in Africa when they fought, and they did a documentary on that. But the psychology of that match, where Ali, got him to tire himself out and then, knocked him out. That's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful psychology. If you watch wrestling, if you can take I always try to take that in my matches. I always, right from the day I started, I always try to give people that same, I want them to believe in my matches the same way you believed in boxing matches. And, it applies to almost anything.
I guess what is more important in the ring? Selling, the psychology of the match, the finish, or the actual selling and bumping around?
Well, they both go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And what selling should come down to is that as a baby face, it's really important to always fight back a little bit. You don't want to be a baby face that never fights back, because after a while, like if you're getting the crap kicked out of you in the ring and it's too much, or you're selling too much, when you start to get that feeling that the fans are starting to look back to the dressing room door to see who's going to come out and save you, that's when you realize you've sold too much. You're selling too much. You're dying out there. And it's up to a good villain to keep you alive all the time. Even though that's where people throw you in the ropes and call for a sunset flip. It's not a great, everyone knows you're not going to win, but it gives them a little hope that's from that sense the term hope spot.
Right.
But, it works the other way around too, is that if you're a good baby face and you're selling like crazy and you're making the heel look pretty good, then it's his responsibility. And if he's a good pro, he'll take that into account and do a couple of things to make you look good, to keep you alive. And my attitude always was is that the heel should do all he can or can do all he wants in order to establish that he's, that he's the villain, and also that he's got the upper hand. And when you make your comeback, it's up to that heel, if he's a decent heel, to reward you in kind for how considerate you've been by making him look good. Now it's his turn it's a give and take thing. It's his turn to give back to you now and make you look like $1 million. And when I first turned heel on the WWF, you watch my old not even Heart Foundation matches, but when I first turned heel, and you have to understand my sort of position at that time. I was a babyface that had been working for my dad for 6 years, got into WWF, and I was working matches with guys like The Spoiler and Rene Goulet and Sweet Hansen, and these guys they didn't want to do anything for me. They didn't call anything for me. If they did call a drop kick, they usually moved on it, and then you let you catch them with the toe of your foot on their shoulder or something like that. They almost went out of their way. Their idea of calling a really great spot for me was a sunset flip or something. And it was, they were killing me in the ring by not giving me anything to do. And then when I turned heel, I was in a position to say, I'm going to show all these old farts in the dressing room what I would do with a Bret Hart if I was wrestling Bret Hart. So I would go in the ring with someone like Jim Powers or Paul Roma or whoever it was, like just the bottom babyface guys, whether it was Brian Blair or Jim Brunzell in a single match, or Rick McGraw. I would go in the ring with S.D. Jones and make these guys really, I would kick the crap out of them, but I would always give them a really, really good long comeback. I always gave them back exactly what they gave me. And I can remember some guys struggle with that a little bit. They think they were getting eaten up too much, that I'm kicking them around too much. And they'd start fighting back, and I'd always say, to myself, like, I know what I'm doing. I'll make it. And I would remember telling Rick McGraw, bless his heart. And I said, Rick, you got to let me do my thing, because I'm doing my thing. I'll give it all back to you when the time comes. But don't start fighting me halfway through it. And that's kind of where that goes. It's a give and take thing, but you always need to give them. I think a baby face should have at least 3 or 4, depending on what kind of baby face he is, really good pinfall combinations or things for his comeback. If you got more than 4, sometimes that's too many. But 4 good, especially finishes, you look at my logic and it's played out all throughout my career. Gut punch, leg sweep is the one. 1-2 kick out, and it's a backbreaker, and then it's something off the second rope. And you get they don't have to all be the same, but there was always a logic in my mind. So these are my 4 or 5. I have 5 or 6 big moves that I can try to finish my guy at the end. Bulldog, leg sweep, backbreaker, suplex, whatever it is. If you can do 3 or 4 and you get a 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, that's when, if you go over 4 times, then you're kind of going to the well too many times because people start to, like 4 is plenty, 3 is good, 4 is plenty.
Right.
But that's about what I would expect. If you're a heel and you're not giving your babyface at least 3 to 4 moves at the end, then you're not doing enough for him.
Who would you classify? You said like the Sweet Hansons were difficult or even bad as heels. Like when you started in Stampede, who would you classify as a heel that made you look really good?
Oh, Dynamite Kid was one of the best. He could work with a broomstick out there. To be honest, there were so many great old pros that could make, I could name, how long's your tape here? I could name some,
right.
Leo Burke, Dory Funk, the Funks.
Bad News.
I would rate Bad News as one of the guys that was the one thing he was missing. He had no psychology whatsoever.
I was going to ask you, were you ever in the ring with somebody and said, "Oh, this guy just doesn't have it"?
Yeah, Bad News would be one. I mean, they just couldn't understand that it was a work and that psychology's, you gotta give everything back that you've taken. I think, especially when you work. I mean, it's different if you're going to eat up SD Jones, because that's his job is to make you look like a monster, and then the next guy, let's say King Kong Bundy's working with SD Jones, which he did, he squashed him in a couple of seconds, I think, at WrestleMania. But the more but eventually King Kong Bundy's got to fight Hogan, and when he does fight Hogan, Hogan's got to look like, the powerhouse, he's got to look like the guy that can actually take this guy on. That's the whole logic. But Bad News' logic was, he just ate everybody. It was a meat chopper. He just chopped meat no matter who he was working with, whether it was Bret Hart or whether it was Hulk Hogan or whether it was. And a good babyface would say to himself down the road, I don't even want to work with him. You know that if you're going in as a babyface and you're I used to use this expression all the time, if you're a 9 going in and you come out looking like a 2 or 3, which is what Bad News did with everybody you wrestled, that in the end you're going to say to yourself in the sense that you're protecting your stock, I don't need to work with this guy because I'm right now I'm over with the crowd, everyone loves me and I'm doing good business. As soon as I work with him, I'm going to be, my stock devalues. And when there's a lot of heels that can be like that in a sense that believe their own history. Bad News was a guy that didn't want to take an arm drag because he was a judo guy, and he didn't want to do this. He'd never give back. He'd want to have juice and have you bleed all over the place for him, but he wouldn't even take a hip toss for you. He was not a good guy to work with.
How did you develop your finishes?
I just thought, it's tough because, everything in wrestling's been done before. And if you can come up with anything that nobody's done before, you should really pat yourself on the back. It's not easy to do. Anytime you see something that you've never seen before, that's rare. I've always said, like that simple little thing I did with the figure 4 on the post as an example. When I thought of that, I said, I was really proud of myself. I thought it was really brilliant in the sense of nobody's thought of it.
Right.
Nobody's ever done it before. And it's like even the reverse and the sharpshooter. How many times you watch these Japanese wrestlers, but nobody ever thought of reversing it or coming up the counter to it. And it may not mean much in the long and short of the business, but hey, it's something. Front turnbuckle. I don't know that any wrestler ever did a front turnbuckle until I did it. And if you watch WWF wrestling, you'll never see any wrestler ever hit those stairs until I did. I was the first wrestler, in my knowledge, that ever took the stairs out. And now you see everybody bowling the stairs over. And it's it may not mean much, but it's something to be taken by somebody and flung full blast into those big steel steps. And, as you're going into them, you're wondering how you're not going to kill yourself. And then you find a way to do it where you don't hurt yourself. And you go, that was really good. It looks really good and got a great reaction. And like I say, anytime you can do something that gets a great reaction and it actually doesn't hurt you so badly or injure you, and it's new, that's an achievement. Because there's only a limited, it's a square with the 4 posts and 3 ropes, and it's never going to change. It's been like that since the 40s, I think, or before that. But so you're limited with the props and the stage that you have. And a good wrestler really shouldn't have any props. Like you shouldn't have to use a gimmick all the time. You shouldn't have to use your manager. You shouldn't have to use a chair. You shouldn't have to, you should be able to use just your body if you can. And, sometimes you can resort to those things, but a good wrestler will be able to do those things without props. And that takes a lot of smarts to be able to be original and unique in how you do that.
Early on in your career, like when you left Calgary, where would you say you learned the most psychology? Was it going to Japan or maybe going to Amarillo with the Funks or any of the territories? Where do you think you learned the most leaving Calgary?
Well, Japan, they don't have much psychology. I mean, that's the thing.
That was more in ring, probably learned a lot. Or
yeah, I would say I learned a lot from maybe the Funks. And when I was in Amarillo, I'm sure I learned stuff. I learned a lot probably sitting in a car and listening to guys like Harley Race and the Funks. When I was 17, 18, 19, I had the luxury of the privilege of riding with some of the great names in the business and being sort of like a little fly on the wall, listening to them talk about how they did this and how they did that, and how they were working with, and they did this down in Florida. But psychology, I don't think it's something that I learned in any specific place, to be honest. I think it's something that was, I think it was something ingrained into my mind, watching wrestling as a kid and watching it all my life and being able to, I was not smartened up to the business as a kid. No one ever took me aside and said, look, this is what it is. Even when I was, I'm going to say 19 or 20 years old, when I started refereeing, I got smartened up driving up to the town in a van by one of my brothers and a bunch of the wrestlers to basically tell me how to count, tell me how to be a referee. And what I was told was this: when the shoulders are down, count them. And when make sure that your authorities, that people respect your authority in there, no matter who's wrestling. You back somebody up or you count to 3 and he doesn't break. The referee has to be respected in the ring. And so I learned that I just applied a lot of, like if it was real, if this was real and it was a real business and it was a sport and it was, what would I do? Like, what would a real referee do? I remember when I amateur wrestled, which is not the same thing, but I don't know, whatever that referee said was, that was the law. You couldn't get in his face over something, or you had to respect the authority.
Did you prefer to have your opponents adapt to your style, or did you have to adapt to theirs?
I think both. What it comes down to is the match and the fans and drawing money, especially when it's a matter of survival. Like my dad's territory, when business is down, or maybe you luck out somewhere and you got a pretty good crowd out there, and it depends on who you're working with. Sometimes you have to make concessions or make allowance for somebody that's not good. If you're wrestling Isaac Yankem in the SummerSlam and he's green and he's from Lawler's territory, then you got to bend over backwards to accommodate him and try to help him and try to do what you can for him to have a great match. You want everyone to go, that was a great match. And then again, you might be wrestling somebody that, like Ricky Steamboat or something, and you're going, this guy's so good. It's just so easy, and then, you don't have to worry about that, And a really good wrestler, like I say, will take it upon himself to give and take throughout and make sure that it all comes down to the match, like how to make the match the best for both of you.
Explain the kick out and the pin and the timing of all that. And why do you think so many wrestlers today don't go for the pin early in the title match? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's pretty logical in the sense that, you're fresher in the beginning. And I don't know that you need to. Every now and then you should go for a pin in the beginning just to establish that you're trying to win. But pinfalls, I find one of the things I don't like about the wrestling today is everybody's doing the 1-2 kick out, 1-2 and kicking out. If I was in control of wrestling right now, if I was, actually I had this conversation with Vince McMahon not so long ago. It's the 1-2 kick outs that they're so you got to get rid of those. You got to change that and get away from that because there's too many guys doing them. Too many guys that all look the same and they're all going out with the same kind of bodies and doing the same kind of moves. And they're all going for that 1-2 kick out, 1-2 kick out, and after a while, you're just making it harder for everyone else.
In your eyes, do you feel that there's a different approach technically when wrestling on a pay-per-view as compared to a house show back in the WWF?
Yeah, I think so, but not much. Depends on where you are, When you're wrestling like I was 300 days a year, you have to be careful. Like everybody pays to get a good show, and you can never shortchange them on that. But I know that if I was wrestling, depending on who I was wrestling, but if I had a chance to cut a few corners without taking anything away from the quality of the match, especially dangerous stuff. Maybe it's, where you can protect yourself and you don't have to jump off the top rope and land on your knees again. But, you're working in a small town or, somewhere where you can make a few adjustments that way. But I'll be honest, I never ever looked past the front row. I never, if there was 90,000 people out there, I wanted more to have, the bigger the crowd, the more important it was to have a great match. But, some of the best matches I had were easily in front of smaller crowds. I always just listened to the crowd. If they were really with it, then I gave them everything I had. And if they didn't, if they weren't with it, then I would, take a few steps, take down a few notches because if you're taking you take a front turnbuckle and almost take your head off kind of thing and they don't react, it's like, what, maybe we can just sit in a headlock for a couple of minutes. It's not going to make any difference. Give them what they pay for. Give them what they deserve.
Right.
But a good fan reaction is always what you go by. And the pay-per-views, they're a little more pressure, but I think you have an obligation, I think, as a pro to I always looked at the fact that there's kids out there that have paid to see you, or at least I always thought there's somebody out there paid to see me, not everybody else, but they paid to see me. And I'm not going to shortchange or disappoint those fans. I'm going to give them everything I got. And I want them to go home tonight and go, I'm going to see him the next time he comes in town because I loved what he did tonight. And, it was easier for me to give the whole 9 yards all the time. I can remember when I was wrestling Mr. Perfect, as an example. We would always do this 20-minute match that was, and we would just had such great matches. And then sometimes it was, we had a chance to, we'd be hungover and stuff and be like, let's take out some of the spots. Like, let's take out a few of them just to make it a little easier for ourselves. And when we tried that, we'd be in the ring. We tell ourselves that before we went in. And once we got in there, it was too hard to remember what to take out. It was just easier just to keep going. And we just did everything, no matter how hungover anybody was. It was just easier to go the full 9 yards.
Can you be a good high-flying wrestler and still have good psychology?
Oh, yeah. I think you can. I didn't do a lot of high flying. And I'm not sure if this will be one of your questions, but in wrestling, you never do anything that you can't do very well. If you don't punch very good, don't punch. Figure something else out. What do you need? You practically need to know how to punch in wrestling. But if you don't do something well, like that's what you got to respect about, say, Hogan, for example. He didn't try to do head scissors, and he didn't try to do a lot of fancy stuff because he couldn't do it. And so he just stuck with what he could do. And that's what worked for him. A lot of wrestlers think that they need to try to work like the smaller guys, or like to do this, or like to do that. They don't have to. You have to just do what works, and to stick with what you do well. And what was the question?
Oh, we were just talking about
Can high flyers get over?
Yeah, the high flying guys. I mean, if you can do it, like I watch Rey Mysterio, and I think he's just amazing to watch. Small or not small or whatever it is. He's a gifted wrestler that's going to stand out for years and years and years as being one of a kind because he's got an incredible imagination to come up with so many different ways of doing things. I don't know of anybody smaller, even near his size, that's shown the same creativity that he has. So, I mean, I would say that he's got great psychology, and it's always surprising with something new. I think you want to try to, if you are doing high flying, as best you can, because high flying is a little, there's sort of a different skill to it, and there's different guys that are doing it. But you always want to try to keep the logic. I think if it was me and I had guys like Rey Mysterio working for me, I would try to help. I would always try to remind them to make it seem real. Like, if you were going to do that move, would you do it in a bar fight? Would you climb up on the bar and stand up there and look backwards over your shoulder and do a triple somersault off somebody? And if you're good enough, you can find a way to do that. Make it seem like, yeah, he could do that in a bar, and if he did, he'd do it right, and it would work, and it would make sense. But I think a lot of the wrestling today, they come up with these things, and it's like you just go, that's so phony. Nobody would ever do that in a real fight. And when you find yourself thinking that, that's when you look at it and go, how do I make it seem more real? Like, I used to always see Sabu, who I have a lot of respect for. He used to do the thing with the table. I remember watching him smash into the tables all the time, and I thought, there's something missing with that. It doesn't seem real. It seems like the guy's going to move ahead of time, and he's going to crash through the table, and that's kind of what it was. And that helped me come up with the idea of doing that thing with Kevin Nash, where I got catapulted into the table and broke it. I took what Sabu did, his idea, and made it seem real. Like, made it seem like you could work it into a real, that could happen in a fight or a bar fight, or, somebody does something to you and you go crashing through into something, and then they pick you up from the rubble and throw you back in, and then that was psychology. That's psychology.
Well, how smart do you think the fans are to what's going on in the ring? And do you think wrestling had to adopt in the ring nowadays to the lack of kayfabe and smartening up the fans?
Yeah, that'd be probably a better question for the young guys that are out there today. I would say, regrettably, that all the fans a lot of fans are smart to the business, and that's a shame in a way, because it makes it a lot tougher, which is why I think that the younger guys can answer that question today. I think what the business is now is it's more the fans appreciate the art of it all, and if you can, try to stay true to what the art of the wrestling is, that's about all you can do. I think the fans know when the wrestlers are calling high spots, and I think the wrestlers know when, the fans know everything that's they know the whole. They're pretty smart to the business, and it's hard to get around that. I believe that changed. I've always believed that the business changed that way, where I think people were sort of smart to the business, but they weren't really smart to the business till after the thing with Vince in Survivor Series. I always thought that the business shifted over the next year from sort of full-blown, like everybody was in on it, everybody knew what, people knew what kayfabe meant, people knew what the terms and the terminologies, and I thought I've always thought that the business shifted at that point into something else. It was no longer about wrestling like holds, and it really lost its connection to the past, like the 20s and the 30s and the shooters, and guys like Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar. I watched them wrestle at WrestleMania a couple of years ago, and I thought they came the closest I've seen since, I think, my heyday anyway, to making wrestling seem real again.
Do you feel that Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, do you feel that they had good psychology or bad psychology in the ring?
Well, I'd say Flair had no psychology, period. I don't know if someone could show me where he ever had a psychology. Never had any that I ever saw or ever witnessed in my experiences with him in the ring. And I don't mean that as going after Flair here, but Rick really didn't have much psychology. Rick was a hard worker that, when in doubt, he did the same things that he remembered how to do. And he always did what he had his routines, I can remember Rick sometimes 2 or 3 times in a match doing the upside down turnbuckle, coming up off the corner, running down, beat him off the top. I mean, when you do it 3 times in 15 minutes, you go, what is this guy doing? Like, he doesn't know what he's doing, but it's all action. And you can't deny that he's working hard. But does it make any sense? No. Hogan Hogan had pretty good psychology in the sense that, it reminded me of my brother Bruce's psychology. His psychology, which only worked really for Hogan, was to have the whole world fall on him. If he had 10 guys on him, he would, he liked to fight against insurmountable odds. And Hogan had the look that he could, when he started knocking these guys down and cleaning house on 6 or 7 guys and dumping the manager, and, it was believable, and it always got that reaction. But if Hogan's psychology, if he was 210 pounds, or he was like Brian Blair's size, and that psychology would have been nothing. He had no psychology whatsoever. But he was the star of the company and had a way the characters that he had, from Killer Khan to Kamala to all these big giant monster heels back then. Bundy, one after another, he was able to. That was kind of the beauty of how they built Hogan, was that he was able to carry it off, and he looked like a real, with the muscles and he had the right look, and he was. I wouldn't say there was anything wrong with his psychology, as what he needed at the time to get where he did. And I think that was probably Vince's psychology more than anything else.
What is the difference in psychology in working like a main event as compared to an undercard match?
I don't think there's much difference. The only thing is, I think you have to respect the main event, and you can't do things that they're going to do. You can't undermine them, because they are the main event. But I think you can do whatever you want. It's your match. You can tell your own story. You can do whatever you want. Like I would never be offended by Rey Mysterio doing some of the most beautiful high spots in the first matches with whoever he worked with, and I'm on last with Bad News. I mean, it's not going to affect anything I'm doing. I think you have an obligation to always give the best match you can, especially if you've got a really good crowd out there, and to make yourself and make your opponent, especially if you can do it without hurting yourself. But you don't want to be, if you're if back in my dad's territory, I can remember being in a cage match or a chain match with somebody, and the first or second match we'd go out there and have a bloodbath. You'd go, "What are you doing? You're just killing me in the main event, making it really hard for me to, I have to cut my own head off to get a reaction." So you have to be careful that whoever's below you they don't do things, or they don't take away from what you're doing on last, because you are more important. And sometimes they don't respect that or appreciate that, because you get a lot of guys in the opening matches want to be up there in the main event, but that's not your decision to make. It's the promoter's decision, and that's just the nature of the business. You have to work. You have to pay your dues. But I would never do things that to undermine somebody else that's on after me. But at the same time, I think that's an open book to do whatever you need to get yourself up to that top spot someday.
As far as working tag matches, what is the psychology of working a good tag match as opposed to a bad one?
Well, there's a whole different psychology to tag matches. One of the teams that stands out in my mind that had great psychology, but it was a little, it was Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard had great psychology. And they did a lot of stuff that was, they were sort of, if you sum them up, they did everything that every good heel team did through the 60s and 70s, like the false tags, the switches, without middling the referee and stuff like that. They were really switch places and tag in and out and work a hold, and they were really good that way. And I think a lot of people could go back and look at that. But the business has changed. Like, I know that I thought that as good as they were, and they were good, and they stood out because they were good. But I'd also seen it all before. I'd seen every spot. It was like watching every heel team that had ever worked, especially in that Charlotte territory, I think, in those days. It was probably no different than, what some of the great heel tag teams were doing for years and years and years. I think tag team psychology is really no different than anything else in the sense that you got to try to keep it real, and you have to work the tags and the you can't false tags and stuff like that, and middling the referee. You have to measure all that stuff and make sure that you're not doing it too much. And if you end up where the referee's got all the heat because he couldn't keep control, and you're making a mistake that way, you have to do it in a way where it's not overkill. It's hard to say. I think that's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. It seems like the tag team wrestling has lost a lot of its spark the last 10 years or so.
Totally.
And it's a shame because it's a totally different psychology, and a tag team match can have as much suspense, a different kind of suspense than any other match on the card, with the false tags and the switching around and double teaming and stuff like that. If it's done right and you have great teams, there's no reason why they can't resurrect it. If it's, I hope they never lose sight of those kind of things, because it's an art. Tag team wrestling is an art in itself.
What is the difference in psychology, I guess, when you're wrestling someone once, knowing that you're going back to the same town next month in a rematch and maybe even a third time?
Well, you never want to repeat yourself, which is where guys like Flair, like I say, you do the same match every night for 30 years, 50 years, 100 years. I always, I don't know that they remember everything a month later, but when I worked for my dad, we were back in the same town the next week. So I think I learned to add a lot of different things to my repertoire of my matches, which also gives, you got to go back to basics sometimes, like, sitting in a hold and making people believe that you got a headlock on. Like in the old days when I started, it was easier you could take somebody over in a headlock and they weren't shouting boring as soon as you did it. They'd let you kind of build your case for realism in those days. But I guess it's important not to be similar all the time. I know I get people that comment about I used to do the same signature moves all the time at the end, and people think that that's some way of saying that I wasn't very unique either. But my logic and my attitude, and I always understood that, I said, it's not. If I'm going to use these 3 or 4 or 5 moves all the time to finish my opponent, why would I change them just to, so people don't say that about me? I'm not worried about what the fans say. If it was a real situation, you keep your 4 aces up your sleeve and wait to use them, so you could win your match. And that was always my logic, and I think it makes sense to me anyway. So, but I think you can't always go back to the well and do the exact same things all the same, exactly the same as you did them the last time. Like I always like to, throw a twist in there. Maybe when I was going for I'll say the backbreaker or something, I'd have them rake my eyes and get out of it.
Right.
And in the middle of the comeback after, so that we could, throw a couple more twists and turns. I think when it comes to psychology and wrestling, I think it's really important to remember that you don't want to do what the fans think you're going to do. Like if the fans know that you're going to get thrown into the turnbuckle and you're going to go upside down and you're going to straddle yourself on the top like Flair, and then you're going to run down the apron and you're going to climb up and you're going to stand there and the guy's going to give you a gut shot and peel you off the top. Anytime the fans can predict what you're going to do, then you're not a very good pro.
Do you feel it's better for the babyface or the heel to set the pace of the match?
Oh, for sure, the heel. The heel drives the car.
Okay.
The heel drives the car, and if you're a good heel, you should drive the car. Babyface can't control that at all. He shouldn't try to control it. He should. The only time the babyface should have a lot of say in what he's doing is when he's, when you're champion. I think you have to. You have to take the responsibility to. At least when I was champion, I always thought that it was my duty to protect myself for the company's sake, make sure that I, got everything in that I needed to be that star of the company kind of thing. But a good heel, and if you're working with somebody that's green that can't do it, then you have to lead them along and guide them. And, it's really important to have a heel that can drive the car. If he can't drive the car, then you have to help him steer it. But I mean, the heel, even a heel that's not so great. I mean, if you lean over once in a while and kind of help with the steering wheel, you're going to go a lot further. Because a lot of times it's just a matter of, they say you're both working for the same objective. And you're not in competition with each other in the sense that the heel, it's his job ultimately to make you look like $1 million. And the babyface should just help him do that.
Now, you were talking a little bit about the crowd earlier on and stuff for being smart. How much does the crowd dictate what you do in a match? And what are your thoughts on wrestlers when they ignore the crowd and book the match from start to finish and stick to it regardless of how the crowd reacts?
Well, there's different ways of looking at that. But I was lucky. I don't think that I never was affected too much by the old chants about boring. I remember when I first started, and even when I was talking earlier about some of these old farts working with me, I'd hear the boring chants, and it would really bother me because I never had anyone shout boring to me in all my career. And whenever you never let the fans ride you. I don't know how. Maybe it's different today. But I never let the fans dictate. I never let them think that they could push my buttons to get me to do something or get me to change what I'm doing. It's okay to stick with as long as you know what you're doing. Stick with what you're doing because you can't let the fans rattle you. That's the first thing. Is that because a lot of fans. It's an intentional thing. I remember ECW. That was the thing that was hard with ECW kind of fans out of the East Coast here when you're wrestling back in 95 and 96. They would go against the grain and they would be cheering the heel kind of thing no matter what you did. And it was like, it just hit you in the face because it didn't work. You're trying really hard to get sympathy and you're trying to be the hero at the end and they're crapping all over you all the way through it. And, it's tough. And, all you can do is it's kind of like someone ribbing you. If they're ribbing you, you never let them know that they're getting under your skin. If they know it's getting under your skin, they're just going to rip you more. And what you have to do is stand up for yourself and stick to your course and stay with what you do and what you know will work in just a matter of time. And hope that there's enough in the audience there that'll give you a break. Because it's not easy for someone to keep razzing you all the way through the match. And they got to get tired too.
Right.
But at the same time, I believe that you have to listen to the audience when to the other part of your question. You have to listen to the audience when to what they're reacting to in the other sense. Like when they're into the match and they're really popping on stuff, you may have to adjust your match to benefit, to make it, your objective is always to have the best match possible as best you can. And, the only way to gauge that sometimes is in the ring by listening to you should always keep an ear cocked to the crowd and how they're reacting. If they pop on something, they may pop on something one night, they may not pop on another night. You just got to use your own judgment over a period of time. But you always got to listen to the crowd in the sense that, you want to make them happy. You want to give them what they want in the end, whether you're heel or babyface. You can sort of tell what's necessary here, or this will work. What they need right now is this, and then you just do it,
Back in the 80s, how much of the match did you actually know before you went into it? Would you just plan out certain spots and then?
Well, in the 80s or 90s?
80s, 90s.
Well, I came from a crossover of generations, really, as I was capable of going in there with a guy like Flair who kind of made it up all on his own. That's how I broke into business. Guys would make it up and, make it up, call it in there.
Right.
Call it in the ring, kid, And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I say, you can work with some guys that know what they're doing. I had no problem going in the ring and letting someone like Gary Funk call whatever the hell he wanted, because you could do it kind of thing. And at the same time, I also, learning with Dynamite, learned to to connect a whole series of different moves together in sort of more complicated kind of spots that you would you'd have to think about and put a lot of concentration to and memorize them like you would script for a movie or something. You just remember, gotta duck, do this, there's a lot of thought and memory that goes into remembering a lot of these sequences that someone like, the older generation, they took pride in calling it in there, But I came from both. I could go both ways. I could, work with Shawn Michaels in an Iron Man match and spend maybe 2 hours sitting with him, which is a testimony to both of us. We'd sit there for a couple hours and map out 60 minutes worth of high spots one after another and remember them all, which is a sign of really two great wrestlers that can do that the way we did. I mean, I would never take anything away from you on that. And then at the same time, I can go in there with somebody like say Terry Funk and never talk to him until you get in the ring. And it's a question of versatility, I guess.
Speaking of Shawn, have you talked to him at all over the last couple of years?
I don't imagine I probably will.
Okay. What makes a good babyface?
Good babyface has to have a lot of fire. I think a good babyface needs to be humble. He needs to be genuine. He needs to be somebody that the fans believe is a nice guy and has got a good heart. I think whenever you become a babyface that's kind of an asshole and doesn't have time to sign an autograph and he's walking out the back, he's kind of like, it's just a show. He just pretends to be a hero. Warrior stood out as somebody that was not a real hero and was not a real, not a good guy outside the ring. Didn't have the time of day for his fans, stuff like that. Opposed to a Bret Hart that appreciated the fact that he had fans and had no problem signing autographs for some of the guys when he left, for the kids out there at the back, especially kids that hung around and really meant something for you to stop and even just shake their hand or sign their program. I think those little things all are really important, and you should never forget where you came from, especially if you're especially if you need it. Like, I think I learned that when I worked for my dad as a babyface, that, sort of going back to the Von Erichs and stuff like that, when you were the star of the company and it was your dad's business. Anytime you had any fans and you had support, it's so hard to get fans. It's so hard to keep them. It's so hard for them to keep paying money to come see you all the time. And, it's, you have to work at that. And I think when you forget that, you forget that these people save their money and they work all week to come down and they buy your T-shirt, they buy your little finger and stuff like that. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have a job. You wouldn't have, and so it's important to give back to your audience all the time. And I think a lot of wrestlers, there's a tendency sometimes to forget where they came from and suddenly think, "Oh, I don't need the fans anymore. God, I'm a superstar." But I think you always have to put yourself in a fan's shoes. I always did anyway. I remember when I was a little kid, Friday nights, walking up to the baby faces. And I got their autographs, I don't know how many weeks in a row. But it was always just to go up so you could can you sign my program again? It's like they look at it and they sign it, But I always remembered the baby faces that didn't sign it. And I knew them, I'd see them later on. Sometimes I don't know that they knew I was Stu Hart's kid. Like the boss's kid. I was standing with a bunch of kids and they go, "Yeah, fuck off, kid." And you remember them. I don't like him anymore. I'm not gonna, I'd see him at my dad's house. I wouldn't even want to talk to him or shake their hands. Or there's a connection there that gets lost when you disappoint a fan. And the rest of the business, especially in smaller circuits, independents and stuff like that, I don't think you can disappoint too many fans. You better hold on to try to keep every fan you got.
What makes a good heel in the ring?
A good heel is somebody that can make his baby faces. A good heel is somebody that can keep touch with or keep a strong semblance of reality all the time. I mean, more real you can be, the better you are, the better off you are. And a good gimmick, you got to have a good something new or different or something that makes you stand out. I mean, I always loved Mankind when he did with the leather face and all. I thought, it's a really good gimmick, and you can really scare guys, little kids, and, like I remember Mankind's high pitched kind of, not high pitched. I'm thinking of Paul Bearer,
Right.
High pitched,
Screaming.
but I think it's just being unique and being. You always go back to revert to if you were a kid watching wrestling. What would it take to stimulate your imagination? Like who impressed you as a kid? Like I remember Abdul the Butcher.
I was going to say the same guy.
Was probably the most vicious monster. I don't care who they've ever had since the Kamalas and whoever. There was nobody more vicious and terrifying than Abdul the Butcher.
Right.
I think he's probably more people like me that lost sleep as kids thinking about Abdul and coming in the window and biting my head off. As a beauty to. I don't know that they don't credit someone like Abdul for being a great, great worker. He was just, they dismiss him sometimes. But he was a great, great, great worker. And he carried off his gimmick so beautifully. And, I remember Flair knocking Mankind in his book. And I took offense to it. Because Flair, who had never had any psychology, was very unoriginal, if you ask me, opposed to Mankind, who played 2 and 3 different gimmicks, sometimes simultaneously, and worked different styles, and had a lot of, you never knew what Mankind was going to do next. And I think he was a great villain and he had one thing about Mankind, he had brilliant psychology. And, it's not about how, it's not all about taking upside down turnbuckles or, it's about, not knowing what you're going to do next. And I could watch Mankind all day long. He was always unique and different, and he was a great villain. He was scary to little kids and stuff. And he was scary to grown-ups, too. I mean, he was never anybody that you laughed at and went like, okay, he's just a pretender. But I thought he was unique and original, and that's important to being a great heel.
Do you feel that 2 heels or even 2 baby faces can have a successful match against each other without tarnishing the other's character?
2 heels or 2 baby faces?
Can 2 heels actually have a match against
Sure,
each other?
Yeah, but you have to. It's a tough thing to do because you have to be very careful that you don't allow, depending on what you're doing, where you're going with it.
Right.
It's not good to match up 2 heels together, but if it's sometimes it can be interesting and sometimes it can pay off. The important thing is to stay true to your characters and stay true to your fans in the sense that there's fans that believe. I used to love watching the big monster heels go at it. The important thing is if you're going to stay heel, then stay heel. You don't want to. I can remember the Hart Foundation wrestling with Demolition when we were both heels.
Right.
And it was tough because what happened was that one of us would end up being the baby faces. And I remember we talked about it in the dressing room one time. And it was basically Demolitions said, I think they said, oh, we're going to end up being the heels for sure. They hate us more than they hate you. And I remember saying, no, I don't think so. And we went in there with completely the backwards psychology. And we were the heels. Our foundation were the heels, and they were the baby faces. And the match was designed or set up all totally the wrong way. And it's hard to predict what can happen. I don't blame anybody for that. But if you want to watch One Man Gang versus King Kong Bundy, and they're both heels, there's a way to do it like King Kong versus Godzilla, where you just keep your gimmicks, stay true to your characters, and let everyone go. That they're satisfied that you both were vicious enough, and that you were sort of you didn't diminish that heel character, even if you're one heel, assume one heel would go over. There's a way of doing it, I suppose, where you don't turn yourself babyface. That's the thing. You don't want to get in a situation where you turn yourself babyface. Like you watch Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, when Kevin Nash after WrestleMania, the WrestleMania 12 match. Yeah, Shawn totally had the wrong psychology. He went in there and turned himself babyface and killed Diesel as the champion. And it was all because he was doing all the fancy babyface moves, and he should have been a vicious little youth. And I remember thinking that the wrong psychology. You turn yourself babyface on purpose and you pretend that it was like an accident. But if you've been around long enough, you know what you're doing. You know what when you do a beautiful drop kick off the top on someone like Kevin Nash, that fans are going to start getting behind you. So you got to limit yourself to just doing what keeps your character. And if you want to stay babyface or if you want to stay heel, then there's ways to do it. A good example is watching my brother Owen wrestle me at WrestleMania 10. I remember telling Owen before we went in, I said, it's so critical. It's critical to everything that we're doing, for my sake and your sake, that you stay heel. You need to be a rotten, ruthless little bastard all the way through this thing and never ever take for granted that you can do, too many beautiful moves. Because when you start doing a lot of beautiful moves, and we know you can do them, I know you can do all these babyface spots, and as soon as you start doing it, you're gonna kill me off. They're gonna start feeling sorry for you, and they're gonna start going, we like this Owen Hart. And when they start doing that, we're done.
We were just talking about Owen Hart and your matches with him.
Just that it was really important for him to stay heel when we worked. So I had to almost go over the line sometimes and think of really nasty things that made people go there. Because I know that there was a tendency for some of them to want to cheer. Because he'd been paying his dues for a long time, and people become sympathetic to somebody that they want to see kind of maybe climb up the ladder and get a break. But we were going to go a long time, and this was going to be a big thing for him to be a heel. And so I did things like where Owen, I think I put him in a sleeper, and he back kicked and threw his leg back and gave me a ball shot. And it was little things like that that made him seem really vicious. And Owen got it, I think, pretty quick that he knew that, because we worked for a few weeks before we got to WrestleMania. We did some like little towns and stuff. We worked Wisconsin and things like that. Tag matches with me. I think I was tagged up with Kid, and Owen was tagged up with Razor. And we just kind of felt around with each other in the ring. And I could tell Owen was doing too many fancy spots and nice moves. And we were starting to like him. And I can remember we had a whole match worked out for WrestleMania. And I'm not kidding you, it was about 2 days before WrestleMania. I was at my dad's house and we were working on some stuff in the gym. My dad's in the dungeon. And I said, we're tossing everything. I'm scrapping the whole match. And I'm going to rewrite, rethink the whole thing. And I'll tell you what, this is what we're doing now. We're changing it. And we lost all these really nice moves that Owen was going to do because they would have turned the babyface. And sometimes you got to look at that kind of stuff when you're looking at a situation.
Wrestling promos. As far as doing a wrestling promo, what is the difference between a good promo and a bad promo?
Well, a bad promo, you forget the point and you don't sell any tickets. A bad promo doesn't sell any tickets. A good promo sells tickets. And like I say, it just kind of comes down to common sense, I'm not sure if it's in your play. It's your place in your promo, depending on where you're going, what your point is, or who's doing the promo. Whether you need to talk about where it is, what time the show is, and what building it is, and those kind of things. Maybe someone else is doing that. But sometimes you're required to, address certain key points that are important. It's at the Civic Center this Tuesday that you're gonna, so you have to remember the things that you have to say. But
when you did your promos, did you get key lines to say?
Sometimes.
Okay.
But I think it's good to. I found it very hard for me. I was never the greatest promo guy, but I could be if I knew. And I got better, as you can tell through my years in the business, when I knew what I was talking about. And when I knew what I was talking about, it was easy for me to talk. You know, but I think when I never really knew where I was going, like, and one thing you want to do if you're a baby face, you know, this is, I think it still stands today. You never want to promise something that you're not going to deliver. You never ever want to say, I promise everybody that on this Friday I'm going to beat King Kong Bundy, no matter what, I'll beat him. And then you don't do it, you're killing yourself, because then they don't believe anything you ever say after that. So don't ever promise something that you're not going to deliver. If you're not going to go over, just speak positively about the match, but don't say I'm going to beat this guy no matter what, because you know, when you fail, then you become a guy that's, you know, nobody believes what you're going to say. And you may think that, oh, it won't matter, but it does matter. It really does matter. I had a hard time as a babyface when I first started. My confidence, I never had the confidence to speak like I was going to beat anybody, because most of the time I didn't win. And I was a little reluctant to talk about how I was going to beat Bad News Brown, you know, in the Rosemont Horizon this Saturday or whatever it is, when I knew that I wasn't. And so people say, oh, his promos, you know, Bret Hart's promos weren't very good, but, you know, I never really had a lot to say other than cliches and stuff like that. And you know what, if you can come up with a good cliche, like because Stone Cold said so, or the best there is, best there was, you know, those things can help you, especially when you got measured time. Like most promos, you got the time, set time. You got 30 seconds, or you got 45 seconds, or you got a minute to talk. You know, it gets down those last 3, 4, 5 seconds, and I can see that WWF, the numbers would be running down. You know, you got 4 seconds, that guy be 1, 4, 3. And you know that you got 3 seconds, and you got to end it exactly on that cue. That's when you go, the best there is, best there was, best there ever will be, and it ends, and it's tight. It's cool. If you got something like that too, that works for generic kind of interviews, go ahead.
Do you feel that, I guess, scripted promos are hurting the business today?
Yeah, I think they're killing the business. I think the whole scripting, everything is killing the business. It's a total against the logic and the grain of the whole business. And I don't believe, and I don't know who's exactly in charge of these things, but in a lot of cases, WCW is a good example. They had had all these guys telling me what to do. I can remember Terry Taylor telling me what to do. And I was like, you know, I like Terry Taylor. He was a very nice guy. But I mean, what kind of crowd did he ever draw? You know, what kind of business did he ever do anywhere to tell me what to do tonight? You know, he's going to tell me what works and what doesn't. And, you know, so I'm thinking, you can't have, like Eric Bischoff, you know, what did he ever know about wrestling, really? You know, nice guy again, too, but I mean, it's like, who is he to tell Bret Hart or Stone Cold, you know, what to do tonight? You know, this is what you're going to do. I would say Vince McMahon's an exception to the rule for a guy that was never in the business in the sense that he ever worked in the ring, at least not when I was around. For him to tell you what to do, because he understood it, I think, from being growing up with it and everything. So he was certainly entitled to express that. But most guys that never put on a pair of boots can't tell you what to do in the ring.
How difficult was it to do like live promos when the crowd wasn't reacting to what you were saying?
It can be pretty tough. I don't know that it was a problem for me, in the sense that I was different than a lot of guys, in the sense that I usually went out there and talked. As I got more confident, I talked to my fans and I talked to the audience, and I didn't care if they were making noise or not. You know, I think I was one of those kind of guys that had kept it kind of a low monotone, and I came across like I was talking to somebody, and I wasn't trying to be a character. And I don't know that I was being a character. When I talked up there, I talked as Bret Hart.
Now your match, well, not your matches, but your promos in your feud with Shawn in '97 were like, they were pretty real. Was that right or wrong with that program? What do you feel?
Well, it's a shame. You know, if you look at '97 and you look at how the business was shaping, I mean, people were just not buying stuff. Yeah, it was like, how do you make people believe this is real? Because they're so, I mean, you're getting stuff where I can remember if you watch, and it only got worse as it went on. But, you know, you could be choking somebody like Steve Austin, you're choking him on the floor with a microphone cord or something, and you're really choking the hell out of him, and people are waving the signs at you, and, you know, nobody's taking anything serious. You know, they're just kind of goofing off. And trying to get their faces on TV and stuff. And it's hard to fight that kind of stuff. So my attitude was to try to make it seem as real as possible. And if you look at what I did with Stone Cold, you look at Stone Cold in my interviews, they were pretty intense interviews. I mean, it seems to me that it came across pretty strong that we hate each other's guts, which is totally not true. We got along brilliantly. We were great friends. We were great workers that way. We worked a lot of heat between ourselves that was all pretend. And it should have been the same thing with Shawn. When you look at two baby faces and what we were really like this, how you look at it, like how do you make fans like you guys believe that maybe this is real and that this is a real feud here? And I think the fact of the matter is that Shawn and me, it was an understanding well into before we even worked the Iron Man match that we were going to come back and this is the way it was going to go. I walked out of the ring. We didn't shake hands. I was going to be the baby face with a chip on his shoulder and I was going to start attacking his characters. I think that I maybe made mistakes in the sense that sometimes I went over the line, but I think I was going over the line sometimes in the effort to do really good business with him. And the sad thing about all that is that we could have done such business. We could have worked. I mean, people thought the heat was real. And all we had to do was get a handle on how to measure that, making sure that we didn't cross over where you're saying stuff about Sonny and you're not saying stuff. I'm not saying stuff about Shawn in a way where it's hurting his feelings for real. And I think there was a lot of times that I did hurt Shawn's feelings for real. But I can say this in defense of myself that I would always say to Shawn, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to talk about you posing for Playgirl. I'm going to really rag on you about it. Is that okay? And he's like, cool, that's cool. Go ahead and do whatever you want. And I think Shawn was cool with it. But as soon as I walked out of the curtain and I'm in the ring and I started doing it, I had such a way of being so real, so credible. It was like, ooh, you really zinged them. And it's like, people are just, that's going to piss them off. And I'm only working. And I think Shawn would watch my interviews and I think he would get really, it would be so serious that he would mark out like a wrestling fan and go, oh, that does hurt my feelings. Now I am mad. And I think it just needed to have a better dialogue between us. And I don't take, I understand that maybe I pushed a lot of buttons on Shawn that way. It was never my intention to get things so agitated that we couldn't do business together. My whole idea was to do really big business together for maybe years together. It'd be I can remember telling Shawn all the time through that whole year. People, even the guys in the dressing room, think we really hate each other. But I was only working. I was always talking about Shawn Michaels, who doesn't exist. He's a figment. Michael Hickenbottom, that's a different thing. I wasn't going to say anything bad about him. I'm going to talk about him. I'm talking about Shawn Michaels. I'm talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'm not talking about Steve Williams. I'm not talking about Terry Bollea. But when you're talking about Bret Hart, it's a little different. You're talking about Kurt Angle, you're talking about Kurt Hennig. We're real people, with our real names. We have, it's a little different when you're a character, and you have to differentiate between the two. And especially if you've got a gimmick name, I want to call Stone Cold Steve Austin, a ruthless hyena. It's not really. I'm not talking about Steve Williams, And I think you have to measure it that way. And it's a shame that Shawn couldn't understand that it was all, we all would have done big business if we could have. We ended up working a shoot instead of shooting a work.
What are your feelings on Shawn using your name on TV to get himself over?
I didn't really like it. I find that.
And did you know they were going to do that with the music a couple weeks back?
No, I didn't. I didn't know anything, and I tried not to. I think I'd rather not be included into what they're doing that way. I don't want to be part of it. My feeling is that I'm sensitive enough about all that stuff still that I don't like anyone to make it a story. It's all part of a storyline. It's all part of, that's what it is. It was bullshit what they did. It was bullshit what happened. A lot of things that happened from that I wish we could change. I wish it never happened. And I don't like to ever make light of it. And I don't like anyone to ever think that I'm part of a storyline in relation to what happened at Survivor Series. It'd be easy for me to still walk out on Raw next week and be the new, the commissioner or something and have a big feud with McMahon, or maybe a spike pile drive Lenny McMahon on the freeway or something. There's lots of ways to work it as a storyline. But to me, it's a very sensitive thing. I wish that I had never had that happen. I wish that, there's so many things would be different. I would never have left that company. I would have stayed there. I would have been there when Owen's accident happened. Probably, I think my belief is always that I would have prevented it. I think I would have slashed that to pieces pretty quick and said, why would you risk your life for something so stupid, I would have never had the concussion injuries from Goldberg, which means I would have never had a stroke. There's so many things that all connect to that fork in the road that to me, it was never a laughing matter. It was always a very tough, emotional thing that I battled through. I knew the day I left that I was never going to find happiness in the WCW, that they were never going to do right by me as far as imagination and creativity and stuff like that. I never knew that I'd get hurt there. I never knew that it would be as bad as awful as it was. But, they paid me well. And unfortunately, I got hurt. I didn't collect as much of that big gravy as I wanted to. But, it was not the happy ending for me. That's for sure.
I guess going back to some psychology, because I do want to touch on some of the stuff you talked about later on if we have time. But talk about the start of and end of a good wrestling story. In your opinion, what makes a good wrestling story?
Just if you can convince them to somebody that is real.
Okay.
Anytime you can make them believe it's real, you've done right.
Well, how would you go ahead and book a successful feud from start to finish in today's era?
That's so hard to answer because you don't know. It's different characters and different things. I think, you can build it up to certain finishing moves, like whatever somebody's move is, to somebody finally countering it, beating it, or getting around it, or, when you kick out of somebody's finish, little things. Again, I think the key sometimes is to if they expect something, you want to give them something else. Never let them know what you're going to do. If people know you're going to throw the guy in the turnbuckle and you're going to give you a backdrop, and change it. Take a turnbuckle and take a clothesline. I don't know, you just have to change it. Reverse him into the turnbuckle instead. It's just logic like that. Those aren't very good examples, but anytime the fans can predict what's going to happen,
give them a swerve.
Just throw a swerve, throw a left when they think there's going to be a right, and when they think there's going to be a right, throw a left.
When you had your championship wrestling matches, did you go into working those matches any differently than a regular match?
Not really. Not really. I think I always, a lot of times I looked at everything as from artistic and a professional standpoint. If I knew somebody was a good worker, someone like Pierre Lafitte, or someone like Hogman, if you remember the Godless, they were good workers. They weren't necessarily over as super heels or anything like that. But it's like, I want to give them a good match. I wanted to have somebody say, hey, take notice of this guy. He's actually pretty good. And needs a little more, he's maybe never going to be the top heel, but he's somebody that's solid, convincing. I can give him a really good match. I didn't look at somebody and go, the fans don't think he's a great heel, so I'm going to give him only 40% of what he needs to get him over. I would always look at it. Sometimes I found it a challenge to take the lesser promising guys, if especially they were good and just for whatever reasons hadn't cracked it yet, to just try to elevate them a little higher, give them a little more a positive look.
What is the key to the placement of the sharpshooter, and why do you think it got so over?
Well, the only reason it got over was because they made it get over, and that's Vince McMahon and the WWF got it over. I can remember when they asked me to use the sharpshooter, I can remember saying, holds don't get over it anymore. It's, maybe a finishing move, a guillotine or a death neck breaker or something, but holds weren't really, at that time, weren't the kind of thing that would get over. And I can remember Pat Patterson said to me, he said, don't worry, we'll get the hold over. And that's the truth. They did get it over, and it took a little while. Not very long, but it took a few months.
What makes Pat a great finish man? Everybody says he's the best in the business.
Pat's ability as a finish man was based on the fact that he could, like a lot of guys, I had it, I think, and I think Mankind had it, and Dynamite Kid had it. Just examples of 4 guys that come to mind. That could predict, they could see it all take place like a movie. I mean, I can tell you, like the match I had with Bulldog at Wembley Stadium. I saw the exact same match run through my head for 2 months before I ever had it. I mean, I could just predict it like watching a movie. It's like lying back in the bed. You can see the whole thing. You know exactly how it's going to go, and you know how the fans are going to react because you're picturing in your head the kick out, and then you get up and take them over a headlock, and then you go into the next spot, and how you're going to get into. I always had an ability to run the whole thing through my head, and I can remember with Pat, the same thing. I would tell Pat, because actually when I worked for my father, Stampede Wrestling, I had to. Even when I was refereeing, I had to relay sometimes 9 different finishes back to the dress room for 9 different matches from one side to the other because the dress rooms were separated. So I learned finishes. I learned how to end matches and different ways to do it. And then when I got in the business, right away I got in the business. It was my responsibility to give wrestlers their finishes. So then I would go back to what I learned refereeing and start saying, okay, this is what you're going to do in the first match. And the second match is doing this. The third match. And I'd have an idea. And you learn how to, like when I went to WWF, where a lot of guys thought I was just some just young rookie kind of thing. I was not a rookie. I've been in business 6 years booking my dad's territory in a really hard style, realistic style wrestling territory where realism was everything. And I was able to sit with Pat Patterson in the dressing room. I can remember always right off the bat, I would run finishes by him. Like, oh, I'm like this. And I can remember Pat Patterson would listen to me, and I could tell he would be running what I was saying. He'd see it all in his head the same way I did. I can remember Pat looking at me and going, you can do that? And I'd look at him and go, yeah, I can do that. He goes, show me. And then we go out and I would work a match with me and Jim against S.D. Jones and somebody, and he'd watch it and go, he did it. It was simple but really good. And then it gradually got where I was in a position where he understood that I knew psychology and I knew finishes. And he was, as I got on years later, like when I got to Wembley around that period, McMahon and Pat Patterson often never even questioned what I was doing. It was like, I can remember Vince saying, it just surprised me. You don't even have to tell me what you're going to do. Just go out there and do it. And I don't know of anybody else that had that kind of rapport with them.
Besides the Wembley Stadium match, was there any other matches where you planned out and you executed it to perfection? Like, you were like, it was perfect in every sense? Or was there that one match that you sat back and goes, wow, that was just like I wanted, just how I figured it out to me?
There's a lot of them like that. I mean, I think in the end when I had big matches, and especially with guys that I will look forward to working with, I could sit back and I think about what I would do. I always put myself in the fans' shoes. Like, what would the fan? I took myself out. It's not about what Bret Hart wanted to do. It was about what a fan would want Bret Hart to do. Like, if you were a fan of Bret the Hitman Hart and you were a fan of Kevin Nash and we're wrestling for the title in Survivor Series, how would you see the match going? Like, what would a fan think? Like, what is their imagination saying? Like, they're going, well, Bret Hart's a lot smaller, so he's probably going to take a real ass kicking.
Would you look at it as almost like you're the fan watching your match?
Yeah, always. And that's a good way to do it. That's a good way to look at psychology. no different than Spider-Man's going to wrestle, Rhinoceros Man or whatever. It's like, you just got to look at yourself. If you were buying comics, what would you want to read in the comic? You want to see this sort of confrontation and build up. You don't want to see Spider-Man clean a house on the Rhinoceros Man. If you have the little toy figures at home and you're playing with them, you got to make sure that the Rhinoceros Man is throwing Spider-Man through a wall a few times, and then I see Spider-Man pull himself up and climb out from underneath a bunch of bricks and suddenly spring up to the ceiling and start swinging around doing something. You just sort of apply it to all. It's just kind of simple logic sometimes.
I guess what are the keys to staying on top after you've done jobs to a top guy in the program? How do you get yourself back over?
Well, a lot of things. There's a short memory in wrestling, shorter than wrestlers sometimes think. In the sense that you always think that when you lose, that they're never going to, they won't forget it. You're always, but generally they'll forgive you the next time you're in town. The thing is, you want to try to stay away from, unless it's your job is to be a jobber. You want to avoid doing steady. Like if I know I'm losing if I'm losing 0-1 at WrestleMania 10, it's important for me, and I think important for the company to make sure that the next time I go out, or the next time they see me, that I start to build myself back. But it sucks when you're wrestling bad news and he's beating you every night, and then you come back the next time and you're kind of hoping that they'll help you raise your stock a little bit and have you doing jobs for Rouge Brothers or something. It's like, you got to be careful that you don't keep going down. You want to hope for a stopgap there where you get a chance to kind of redeem yourself a little bit.
What would your advice be to a young wrestler watching this? Say they have a match and the person that they're working is uncooperative and doesn't want to do the job or whatever. What should a young wrestler do? Should he try to work it out with a guy or go right to the promoter? And how would you handle something like that?
That's a tough one. It's a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes you gotta look at whether it's on purpose, whether it's unintentional. There's a big deciding factor there. I knew, like, for example, when I worked with Flair in the WWF, I mean, I know when he was champion, we were having like really, really good matches, like unbelievable matches. As soon as I won the title from him, some of our matches were like, they just started going down. Like it was like I think Flair always thought I wasn't smart enough to know the difference. And I tried to treat him with respect because I respected the fact that he dropped the belt to me. And I always thought he was an old pro that was just working the way he worked, But I finally, after a couple of months, went to Vince McMahon and I said, he's killing me. This guy's killing me every night. He's killing the matches, and I think it's on purpose. And I didn't have any choice. He was killing me off. And so that's a case of where I did go, and I had to kind of draw it to their attention that he was purposely bungling every night. And I was always like, oops, sorry about that out there tonight. And sometimes it was almost like I remember Flair coming back and going, fantastic. And I was like, are you kidding me? How is that fantastic? He didn't even give me a comeback. He had a small package job of figure 4 in the middle of the match. I didn't even get a comeback. I said, if I'm going to be the star of the company, I'm going to have a comeback. What era did you come from? Where you think that I'm so stupid that I wouldn't know that I don't need a comeback. Like, okay, that was really good. Flair was a guy that was a little tricky in there. Some guys will take advantage of that way. There's a couple of things you can do. You can either just thump them, and that's where it comes back to whether you have a good background, you better back up what you need to do. Sometimes you have to be a little forceful. You have to start throwing somebody around and start slamming them through the floor and stuff like that. Make them, you want to work with me or work against me. And at the same time, you may find some guys that they're trying their hardest and they just don't have it. And that doesn't do any good to go at it that way. Then if you're going to start stiffing somebody or struggling with them, you're only going to make things harder. And I think if you're a smaller guy, you better be careful messing around with a bigger guy. Like if you're Rey Mysterio, like the way Johnny Gonzalez is working with you, you better maybe just suck it up and just try to do the best you can.
What's the difference psychology-wise in working a gimmick match, like a cage match or a lumberjack match? And when is it right and wrong to get color?
Well, the psychology of the match, you have to make, it doesn't do any good to have a lumberjack match if nobody's trying to get out of the ring. And it doesn't do any good to have a lumberjack match if the previous matches don't call for you to be having a lumberjack match. Things like that. There's a reason why you're having a lumberjack match, and there's a reason why you're having a chain match or a ladder match. There's got to be some logic behind the reason. You have to make it doesn't do any good to have a ladder match and not use the ladder. It doesn't do any good to have I think you get what I'm saying.
Right.
And getting juice, I think juice is totally unnecessary today. Most of the people are smart to the business. And if people know that you're just cutting your head to get a reaction, it's like, and who's the mark? You're just a mark. Juice should be something that's unpredictable and should be only got when it's necessary and when it's going to have some kind of impact. And again, you don't ever want to get juice if somebody else is getting juice in the main event. If you're getting juice in the first, second, third matches, and you're an idiot.
What advice would you give to someone who's getting maybe a WWE dark match or a tryout? What would you tell them to do to make themselves stick out? Chain wrestle?
No. I would tell anybody that's got a dark match and it's their first tryout to not to worry about getting too fancy. Because they're not looking for fancy. What they're looking for, it's nice if you can do something that's fancy. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do that kind of stuff. But what you want to do is don't do anything bad. Don't do anything that you don't do well. Stick with what you know. And be just very, you just want to be very, you want to show them that you can hit the ropes good. And you want to show them the little things like you know how to land. And things that you're not really paying attention to. Maybe show them that you can do a nice drop kick. Because all the things that come, like the fancy things, they just want to see whether you can do the job. How you look and how you keep your head up and how you tie up and, hit the ropes hard. And, if you trip and fall through the ropes and you land on the floor, how you do it. If you don't know how to land and you don't know how to fall and if you embarrass yourself out there and do something that exposes that you have limited experience and you don't know what you're doing, then those are marks against you. You're okay, this guy needs a little more time, so we'll call him up next year. He's got a great look and he's got a great gimmick, but he's still really green. You want to avoid that. You want to show them that you can do anything. You don't have to do everything that night. They don't want to see that. They just want to show that they want to see that you can do the fundamentals.
When you have an 8-minute match for like a TV match, and right before you go through the curtain, you're told you only have 5 minutes, what do you cut out?
Well, there's no sense wasting anything. I don't think if you got an 8-minute match, there's no sense doing everything you can imagine. I would just, I think it's tough to say. You just do what you need to do. I don't think there's any reason to go too far.
How would you approach a match where I guess you were asked to make someone? And can you give an example?
I remember I was asked to make Tom McGee, and I did. And he was really green. He wasn't very good. But he looked great. And they were kind of praying that he was going to be their new superstar, which is by the way he looked. And I remember telling him, I said, give me your 4 best moves that you do. And I'll tell you when to do them, and I'll figure out where to stick them, and I'll find a way to make you look really good. And that's what I did, and he listened to me. And unfortunately for me, or for him, is that he forgot that he wasn't very good and started to think he was pretty good after that. And no one else knew how to make him. I think you have to make somebody who's trying to take some of the best things he does and bring it out, shine the light on the things that he does well.
Do you feel that talent could overcome being buried by the office?
Sometimes.
Do you have any advice to give anybody as far as
Keep your dignity. Never forget who you are. You're just a wrestling character, and you're somebody that that they make you and break you. But you always have to live with yourself the next day and wake up and look yourself in the mirror as a man and say, I'm not ashamed of myself.
how important do you feel it is for the booker to listen to the fans? Or do you think a booker, to be successful, should just, to just go on his own and go with his plan?
It varies. It depends on the booker, I guess. A good booker will have a sense about, a lot of bookers have their head on the chopping block all the time anyway. So, it's in their best interest to have the right understanding of what's going to work and what's not. And if they can get by not listening to the fans and they have a better intuitive sense about things, then fine. But if they ignore the fans and their booking is crap, then they won't be around long anyway.
I know I was going to ask you one question back when we did the shoot with you. I totally forgot. Was it true that you were supposed to wrestle Steamboat at WrestleMania 2?
Yeah.
What happened with that?
They just changed it, put Hercules in there.
Huh. Okay. Well, you recommended several wrestlers to WWE. Like Test was, I think, one of them. What is the one thing that you look for in a guy before you decide to invest your time?
Well, you always want a good athletic specimen, and you want somebody that's got a good background in athleticism, whether it's a football player or something. And it's always good to have a guy that's actually legitimately tough. My understanding, like my dad always liked what he called specimens. Guys that were really, big legs and big arms on them and a big neck. Usually had a good amateur background, stuff like that. Always meant something to my dad. But the business has changed now. But even that, even something like Rey Mysterio, looking at him, you realize he's a pretty good athlete. Even if he's not a big giant behemoth.
Do you feel that some of the cruiserweights expose the business at all, or no?
I think a lot of them do, yeah. I think a lot of, not just the cruiserweights, I think a lot of the people in the business in general are really, really phony, a lot of them. And they're all trying too hard to have the same look and the same style. And I suppose, you are what you are, and they hire everybody to look the same. They hire you based on your look and stuff like that. But I personally have a hard time watching wrestling today because every time it seems like I turn it on, it seems like everybody's
same old cookie cutter.
Yeah, they all get the 6-pack abs, and they got the they all get the exact same look and the exact same hair and the exact same. They all work the exact same way.
How do you appeal to different people if they all have the same look?
Yeah, I agree. I would think of the wrestling business today is desperately in need of some one-man gangs and some bam-bam big rolls. Just some big, rugged, heavy-looking guys that look like they'd stomp through a pile of those kind of guys.
What made The Rock so good? Guys like Steve Austin and stuff like that.
Well, I think Rock was good because he has a second generation sort of background on it. And, I think just watching wrestling his whole life like I did, like Owen did, like DiBiase and Hennig, and some of the guys that were second generation wrestlers, even if we weren't necessarily, really following it, we understood it. I remember when I got in the business, it seemed like a couple of months after I got in, I kind of had a pretty good idea about how to build a story and how to make and I think that's a big advantage. If you're a second or third generation wrestler, you got a head start on anybody else. Austin, what made him was he was, probably what made a lot of really good wrestlers, I think, is the fact they were probably fans as kids. Mankind, I'm sure, watched The Sheik or different guys when he was a kid. They watched Bruno and Morocco in a cage or something like that. But anytime you watch great wrestlers, I think you absorb it, But if you're a kid that never really watched wrestling and then you're a pretty good athlete and you break into it, and you never had any respect for it, or never followed it, you didn't know who was what. Not only did you not have any respect for the guys from the past, like I grew up respecting Luthez, Gene Kiniski, Hardy Race, Dory Funk. Even now, I mean, if I meet Dory Funk, it's a real privilege. Like meeting Mickey Mantle, it's not. But I mean, I imagine there's some young wrestlers today, if they met Dory Funk, they wouldn't have the time of day for him. And that's a sad. If you don't have respect for the people that built the business, then you're missing the boat too.
A little earlier, we talked about the importance of changing up the matches, especially going to the same town, like in the heyday, like with the house shows. We just did an interview with Honky Tonk Man, and he said sometimes the agents sometimes would book out the same finishes with the same guys in the same town, and that the agents back then had their own agendas sometimes against the wrestlers. Do you find that accurate? Like he said, like Jay Strongbow and a couple other guys, that they would continually like try to undermine some of the wrestlers. You don't agree with that, or?
I never thought Jay Strongbow was doing it too much. I always thought just the opposite. I thought Jay Strongbow was he had a really keen eye. Jay Strongbow was the kind of guy that you watch every night and you never thought he was watching. And one night you had a shitty match or you didn't give a good effort, he'd come back to the dressing room and go, tell you that was the shits. And you'd always be like, you know he was right. I thought, I don't really concur with that so much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Chief usually got his orders. There's sometimes 9 different finishes, so you got to make sure that guys don't repeat themselves. You don't want somebody using the sharpshooter 2 matches before I'm using it and stuff like that. I think it was all pretty straightforward. Maybe I could see what he's saying, but I don't remember that so much in the WWF because they were too smart to do that kind of stuff. And I never thought Chief, he just basically was taking the orders that Vince gave him, and I think he was always pretty
Stand up.
Yeah, it always was important to him to see that the best show went out there.
Right.
I think what Honky's saying might reflect more on territories like my dad's territory,
mm-hmm.
where someone like my brother Bruce, I don't, I keep not knocking my brother Bruce, but it seemed like every night was a 20-minute Broadway because he got there late and didn't know what else to tell the first match. So it's almost guaranteed the first match was a 20-minute Broadway. And you could tell Bruce, Goldie Rogers and Randy Weber have done a 20-minute Broadway for the last 4 weeks in a row. Like, come on, do something different, So I can see where that can be a situation, but I don't remember too often in WWF.
Did you find that when house shows were still going on, when there still was a lot and there was TV, how you would have like a 5-10 minute TV match and then a 20-25 minute house show match with the same guys at the same time? Did you think that's kind of exposed the business a little bit?
A little bit. Coming from my dad's territory, I had a hard time adjusting to the TV squash matches and stuff. Like when somebody sent me in the ring, I remember my first matches I got sent. I was working with Dynamite Kid, I think against Mike Sharp and somebody was you can't go over 4 minutes, 5 minutes for intros. And I'm thinking, how the hell can you have a match in 5 minutes with Mike Sharp and so-and-so, And I got where I, worked around that and, we just figure out ways to do it really fast and just keep it really basic and stuff like that. But it never made any sense to me at all.
Right.
And I had a hard time with that. I'm sure Owen had a hard time with that because we grew up in a territory where nobody ever heard of a 4-minute match. I never had a match in 4 minutes. All the years I worked for my dad.
Right.
I can make whoever the lowest jobber, I could go 15 minutes with it anyway and make it look like a battle.
Right.
And coming from the territory the way I did, it was hard for me to do that.
You wrestled a lot as babyface and some as a heel. What did you find adjusting psychology-wise? What did you think was easier, being a babyface or a heel? And what did you prefer to do and had the most fun doing?
Well, I think I always had more fun being a heel. But the psychologies are just pretty straightforward. Babyface needs to be the underdog, needs to fight back, needs to
Fiery comeback.
a good fiery comeback and show a lot of emotion. Facials are important. Have a lot of intensity. And as far as being a villain goes, you want to be very punishing and very vicious and ruthless in a sense. I used to, when I was at the Hart Foundation, I used to liken the Hart Foundation when we were really working over, especially TV job guys and stuff. If we, or, you know, I always give them a little bit, you know, it doesn't do good just to take 100%. I mean, once you started really working somebody over, whether it was S.T. Jones or somebody, I always sort of like to think it was like a couple lions on a baby antelope or something like that. The more vicious and more people could draw that kind of comparison to, you know, being really, really rotten sons of bitches. Like, you know, I want to see these two guys get their shit kicked out of them in a minute from now. And finally, when Brian Blair can make that tag, you know, he's going to get even. It's pretty straightforward. And then once they tag, Bunzel tags, and he's in there, it's your responsibility to make him look like $1 million and satisfy all those people that want to see you get your, you know, get your lumps. And there's both ways of looking at that. You can sell and sell and sell and do a great job, and then you can get your heat up and get your heat up and get your heat up, and then you gotta return. You know, you gotta pay off and all that stuff.
Now, you became a heel later on in your career. Was there anybody when you became heel that maybe you pat on yourself after, like from maybe the Stampede territory? When you look back on the old days, like the guys you wrestled, go, I want to be like that guy when I'm a heel.
Well, a little bit. I think. I mean, I believe that I was always my own character, you know, but at the same time, I know that I patterned a lot of what I did in my early Hart Foundation heel days off Dynamite. And I did it in a way where I thought it was okay because he was a babyface and I wasn't taking anything from him. He wasn't going to be a babyface there. And at the same time, nobody had seen him. So I wasn't, one of the people were watching me going, oh, he's just a copy of Dynamite. But I bore a lot of things from Dynamite in order to just the sort of cocky kind of thing I was in those times. But I don't think it's not just Dynamite. It's, I always had a strong fascination with Sweet Daddy Siki as a kid, and the sunglasses and stuff. I always found myself kind of being like him in a way. I don't know, just a lot of little guys. Not a lot of little guys. A lot of little things from different guys that sort of make up a character, and you can take what works for you best.
Do you find it as a heel, the smaller you are, the harder it is to get over as a heel? Or that's not true?
It can be, but I mean, depends on what kind of heel you are.
Right.
You know, I was a small heel, but I mean, I have to make up for it by working really hard and being really aggressive and making people believe that, you know, you were pretty vicious.
Who was the best heel you ever saw?
Me. Dynamite Kid probably was a great heel. Archie the Stomper Goalie was a great, like big heel.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Schultz was a great heel. Dr. D. David Schultz. If you watch Dr. D. David Schultz in his heyday, he was Steve Austin before anyone ever heard of Steve Austin.
What do you say to, or what do you think of when you see a young guy trying to be a heel and the first thing he does is just goes out there and yells at the crowd with all the cheap heat and everything? Could you tell a guy like that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I used to always, the little things that make things real in the wrestling match. Like I can remember getting in the referee's face, you know, even when it was just a show I put on, you know, the fast count. It's 1, 2, you count slow and you get up, go nose to nose with the referee. Mm-hmm. The people watching think that's real. Like they go, oh, you know, it's an example of your temperament and stuff like that. People, you know, I always patted myself after McEnroe a lot, the tennis player. When he used to get mad at those.
Got the calls, hot-headed.
That's where I got a lot of my stuff in the beginning. And I loved how he used to get pissed off if this was over the line, and he'd get so hot and be such a dickhead about it. And I implemented a lot of that. And,
is there any other like small little tricks you could tell a wrestler to do that's not obvious, like a cheap heat kind of thing that he could do in the match that like a person wouldn't necessarily think, you know what I mean, off the bat?
Well, there's nothing wrong with playing off somebody in the crowd. Mm. You know, especially if you're walking around the ring and you wrap somebody's leg around the post and some kid's giving you the finger, you know, you can get in his face. So you don't touch him, but don't. don't leave yourself open to lawsuits and things like that. But I mean, the more you interact with that little old lady in the front row, or you pick one person, or little things that will trigger other people around that person and trigger the rest of the audience. Sometimes it's just, don't never forget that the audience is part of the show too, and you can use that to your advantage. You don't have to use the fans, but I mean, sometimes just a little thing like, just, I don't know how many matches I had where I allowed one fan to think that he really did ruffle my feathers and was getting like his booing or his
got under your skin,
getting under my skin for real, and then I'm kicking the rope and getting mad. And I guess there's ways to do it, and little things they're all telling a story. You got to take yourself sometimes and remove yourself from the match. Put yourself in the top seat up above or in the front row and watch yourself in your head and go, there's all kinds of little things that play themselves out through the match. The referee, it's so important to utilize the referee and make sure that he's respected, and at the same time, just little things like the counts. Even if you think if you can make it really think like a 1-2 and you think it was really close, I used to always get up and go, "Come on," and get in the referee's face. But I mean, just doing that little thing, when you do that enough times, where people understand that when you have a close call, you're going to get in the referee about it, and then you do that, allows the guy behind you to maybe come up, not all the time, but sometimes to maybe come up and roll you up from behind for a pin or something for suspense. Little things that you leave loose ends a lot of times that will pay off somewhere else down the road.
What are your thoughts on AJ Styles?
Of all the wrestlers I've seen in the last few years, again, my two favorite, I loved Kurt Angle and I loved Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. That's the best match. I saw a beautiful match with Kurt Angle and Rey Mysterio, another one that was an awesome match. But AJ is somebody that I think pound for pound is as good a wrestler I've seen wrestling out there today. I think he's just, to me, he's everything. I wish he was. I wish I could work with him, and I wish he was a little bigger. Like if he was around my size, and if he was to walk into a WWF dressing room when I was wrestling, I would have said, "Here, marry me with this guy for a while.
Right.
Let me show you we'll have some, watch the matches I can have with this guy." And he's a great wrestler.
What are your thoughts on Teddy?
Teddy's really good, but he's, sometimes the light that shines twice as bright burns half as long. And, you have to be careful that you don't, pull yourself out or, break your back before your prime, It's a lot of guys, all you can say the Hardy Boys, who are doing such incredible, dangerous kind of stuff. But in the end, it's like, how long can you last doing that kind of stuff? And you got to look at the business. You're not in it for 4 years or 3 years or 5 years. You want to be in it for 23 years like I was. And unfortunately, when I got hurt, I probably could still be wrestling now if I hadn't got hurt. So you want to look at everything down the road. You want to have a good back when you're 35 still, because you're still in your prime. Who wants to be Dynamite Kid? Be this great, phenomenal wrestler, and you're crippled in a wheelchair when you're 35 and nobody remembers anything you did.
Have you ever talked to him at all?
No.
Well, so you can't ever go back in the ring, right, because of your stroke?
I'd be playing with fire if I did, I think.
You ever have those times where you're like, I want to go back in?
No, not so much. I mean, sometimes I wish I could wrestle some of the guys that I would love to have worked with Kurt Angle, and I would love to have wrestled Brock Lesnar. I would love to have wrestled Goldberg more times. But, at the same time, I did it for so long, nonstop, and I am satisfied with what I did.
What do you think about the comment Hulk Hogan made recently? He had said something like, Bret ceased being one of the boys when he refused to put over Shawn, brother.
I think it's ridiculous. I mean, I think someone like Hogan, how can First of all, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't even seem to know the facts. It seems like it's just a sort of intentional jab just to throw one out there. It's not based on any logic or anything like that. I mean, I could see someone else saying that, or somebody that understood the circumstance. The thing about Survivor Series, a lot of people don't understand the circumstances, and they all have their, if you're either on one side of the line or the other side of the line, you have your opinion on it. But I think that most people's opinions about it, who cares what their opinions are, because they don't know the facts, they don't know the circumstances. And people say, "Oh, who was Bret Hart to not want to do a job in Canada?" It never had anything to do about Bret Hart doing a job in Canada. That was only just part of it. That was just another aspect of it.
Right.
It wasn't about me dropping a garbage belt in the garbage can. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about time-honored traditions and things like that. It was about respect for one person and another person, and somebody having no respect and having no basis for expecting what he expected.
Is it true when you were in WCW, you kind of overheard, Kevin Nash trashing you on a conference call? He thought you had hung up the phone. They had a booking meeting, and
I never, no truth to that from my end.
Okay. How's your reputation today with Vince? Obviously, you're back sort of with the company on that.
Is this the last question?
Yes, so the last question, and you're doing a DVD set with him and stuff like that.
I don't have anything bad to say about Vince McMahon right now. I mean, the whole thing with the DVD was very positive and very, I got treated first rate by Vince. I got treated first rate by all the people involved with the DVD. And I can almost say that with almost like a bit of reluctance, that I expected that there was going to be misgivings somewhere down the road. But I'm sitting here today and I can tell you that it went really well. And I'm satisfied that they did their best to make me happy and accommodate me. And I'm glad for their sake and mine that we didn't do a DVD. That nobody did a DVD called Screwed, and it wasn't all about Survivor Series. But whoever's concept that was or how that came into play, I think everyone now is going to look at it and go, I'm so glad we didn't do that again. It would have been just a whitewash of a bunch of. I think there was a bit more of an acceptance of, which is what I've always said. I think that in hindsight, everybody maybe wish it had been handled a little better. I don't absolve myself of things that I did. I imagine I got under Shawn's skin maybe a little too much, and was a little reckless in some of the things I may have said about it that brought on a lot of the animosities between us. And in saying that, I also think that Shawn brought a lot of that on himself. And Shawn was emotionally immature anyway, and he was, Shawn was the only kind of guy that you could never patch things up with him. I don't know how many times through that year that I kind of buried the hatchet and we kind of shook in a new understanding, and we would do this from now on, make sure that we didn't want to rock the boat anymore. And maybe when I first came back after the Survivor Series and I worked with Austin, and it was supposed to be me and Shawn at WrestleMania, that's how I understood it. Then he went home and find his smile. And that whole period, I may have been a little too strong on some of the things I said and how I was going about trying to work our sort of pretend heat. I think I was too stiff with him, and I can see where I maybe went over the line. But I always thought that we had an understanding, and I think that it could have been all put on track again, and we could have done great business. But Shawn was he was never honest with himself, and he was never honest with me in the sense that he never really. We never ever really cleared the table and got back to business. We always, even though I got back to business every time, I think he harbored a lot of bad feelings, and it's a shame because we could have done some great business and we could have had some great matches for a long time. And the big difference between Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, and Hunter Helmsley, and all the people that are involved in what happened in Survivor Series, and this is the big difference that the Hogans and the all these people that like to bury me all the time. What it really comes down to is if somebody had come to me, if Eric Bischoff or Vince McMahon came to me and said, "We want you to screw Hulk Hogan, and this is what we're gonna do. We want you to do it," I would never do it. I would never screw Hulk Hogan. I would never screw Ultimate Warrior. I would never screw Honky Tonk. I would never be part of that. That's not how I operate. I was always a professional, and to be part of something like that is goes against the grain of what wrestling is all about. Wrestling is all about trust. It's all about respect, and that's where they're wrong for Hulk Hogan to say that I wasn't one of the boys. I was always one of the boys, and you have to ask one of the boys. You don't ask Hulk Hogan, who had a special star in his dressing room and had a fruit basket and flowers in his dressing room every night, and never had the decency to ever go out there and say hi to the Rey Mysterios and the Eddie Guerreros that were busting their ass, the Kidmans and the guys that were really carrying the weight of the company, WCW in particular. But I mean, Hogan, he never had anything to say to guys in the dressing room. Once he got to a certain point, I'd say anyone from WrestleMania 6 on, Hogan forgot who the boys were and all about Hulk Hogan. And for Hulk Hogan to say that I'm not one of the boys is a ridiculous statement, and he should be ashamed of himself.
Well, thank you for being here. Is there anything you want to plug, website or anything?
Nah, just keep the faith.
Thank you very much. It was a great interview.
Okay.
Thank you.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.